Yes, a very good afternoon, and you are very welcome to this episode of the Uganda Diaspora Show here on Civic Space TV. I am Philip Melissa. In this episode, we have a series of issues to talk about, and among them is a very recent visit of about five heads of state from the African continent to the White House, and indeed what transpired in those meetings between the heads of state and the President of the United States of America. There has been a series of reactions on the interactions seen, at least those that came public, including what they had to share with the head of state of USA, and indeed their conduct in that particular part of the world. But also later we want to continue talking about the peace deal that was again signed between the Democratic Republic of Rwanda, of Congo, and Rwanda in the United States. And in the last part of the show, we shall have a conversation about the electoral season in beautiful Uganda and indeed what is happening on ground. And I'm glad to have some of the people that are participating in the politics here on the show. And that and more we shall have in the next 2 or so hours to make sense of and indeed lay recommendations on how we should move forward with the best practice in the very different sectors. Now, joining me on that conversation is a panel of distinguished citizens of the world and indeed those in beautiful Uganda who have a clear understanding of some of these things, and they're going to guide us in understanding a bit of what each of them means. And I will invite them to say hello to you, our viewers, and certainly we'll get into the depth of the conversation. I'll start with gentleman with extra eyes, respectfully, from the Uganda People's Congress. We have the Honorable Joseph Ocheno. Honorable Joseph, greetings. Welcome to the conversation. And how is where you are?
Greetings. Please leave my glasses alone. They're just resting there to support emergencies, especially while you all know that the health services have collapsed at Kampala. So when my eyes go dark, my glasses up. But it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see all of you. Phil, you look fantastic. And you do a great job. And my other colleagues, Miriam and Albert, great to be here with you guys this afternoon.
Thank you, Honorable Joseph. We're glad to have you here. I also have the Director of Africa, Miss Miriam Chomgasho. She's here with us. Miriam, greetings. Welcome to the conversation. And how is where you are? All right, thank you so much, and we are glad to have you. I also have Mr. Albert Bakasara. Albert, greetings, welcome to the conversation.
Greetings. So, well, I'm glad to be here. I am in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful morning. I'm sure it will get muggy as the day goes on, but right now everything is perfect. And I welcome this conversation. I'm happy to join and participate. Thank you.
Thank you, and we are glad to have you here. And last but not least is a member of the Alliance for National Transformation, Mr. Francis Kam. And Mr. Francis, greetings. You're welcome to the conversation.
Well, thank you, our moderator. Thank you to my fellow panelists at the long interacted with Joseph. Always looking forward to the conversation with him. And here in Virginia, it is a little bit sunny. Temperatures are always high. We have not had a lot of issues like what happened in Texas, but for a fruitful conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And gentlemen and lady, some of what we have to talk about is assessing the visit of five heads of state to the United States of America from the African continent, and those are presidents from the nations of Senegal, Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Liberia. And we had all these have interactions with the President of the United States, but also other officials in the government of the USA. And From what has come into the media, the conversations are majorly in the area of economics and trading, as opposed to what actually the African peoples are used to, where African leaders go out there to ask for help in terms of real cash being given to them and indeed bringing it back home to apply it to their own countries. I want to start with you, Honorable Ucheno. When you have 5 presidents being invited to the White House, first of all, what should the impression be for the people as they live on the African continent, and indeed what should those people expect from such visits of heads of state to the United States of America?
I'm not sure whether there is anything specifically wrong with the major power, the world number one power, hosting leaders, more than one leader from a particular sub-region, and the US has done it before. Number two is, I'm not sure whether it's necessarily the first time that African leaders go to the US, or for that matter, Russia, as powers of China, and have conversations which are specifically confined to trade. I think what to me caught my eye specifically was the condescending manner in which, or at least the element of the report, which to me killed everything else, was how the thing clip that came out that President Trump was the manner in which he was addressing African leaders. I think it was rather disrespectful. The fact that, you have to tell these guys that, look, you guys go speed up, we don't have time, just introduce yourself and carry on. It was not the prefect head teacher relationship that I had in primary school. It was worse. That piqued me. But number two, granted that even if it were trade rather than aid, trade on what terms? I know we'll be discussing the recent peace discussions involving Rwanda and DR Congo. No, Donald Trump is a man who doesn't care about Africa. Donald Trump is a man who almost predominantly does not care about average America. Donald Trump is a man who cares about himself, his ego, and in some areas, possibly a particular critical element, privileged corner of his race. And I say so because I think an ordinary hard-working class American, is not necessarily within Donald Trump's range. You need to know that this is a gentleman who rose to fame and to power with a specific distaste for Africans, and specifically, as soon as Barack Obama was elected, the Democratic Party leader, in other words, effectively candidate, Trump started throwing this unfounded nonsense about the fact that, one, Barack Obama was a Muslim, and two, cheeky, that Barack Obama was not born in the US, and for that reason, he would not, and technically would not qualify for president of the US. The motivation there was not ideological. The motivation there was not necessarily about the interest of the American people. The motivation there was not about the global threat, of terror as we present it. The motivation was, by and large, a Sarah Palin kind of group of extreme right-wing Republicans who are linked to extreme right-wing Jews who do not see any other as a race. So it was substantially racialist. And number two, how does it continue? It continues that while Obama, and when Obama is elected president, forget about Obama's records. I know once we talk about Obama, some Africans in very irritating, cheeky way, all they remember is Libya. And of course, in more recent times, all they remember is homosexuality, as if we can list the street for homosexuals in Kampala, or whether or not really Africa's biggest challenge is homosexuality. By and large, whatever your opinion. No, it was that we do not want this other race, the African, to be the number one global citizen. And it was number two, that we don't want a young population like Phil, Melissa, in America, demographic changes, that would, if they elect a liberal like Obama and their likes, and women demographics, if that category were allowed to get away and so therefore elect Obama or anybody else, then the conservative, right-wing, Anglo-Saxon America, who are very much full of themselves, would never reclaim power. That is where Donald Trump comes from, and I get sometimes rather uncomfortable. And yeah, when we forget that that's what Trump was. As soon as Obama comes in, becomes president, becomes actually popular, delivers generally substantially for America as American president. Trump runs with, it's not surprising that the Trump we have today is the Trump that is carrying out the policies that he did in Trump 1 and now Trump 2. This African revival is all of a sudden a reawakening that if it's not working with Russia and Ukraine, it's not working with the rest of the world and China is emerging, then the African sweatshop republics and the African heart of natural resources, global natural resources, is still as silly in a way, in quote, and as desperate as it is, so that sometimes have zombie quote leaders, I'm not referring to anybody, who are prepared to sell Africa for cheap. So Trump is engaging with African leaders in a manner in which it serves him to mobilize for uranium, for bombs, to go ahead and bomb the rest of the world and threaten the rest of the world. But it's absolutely nothing to do with enhancing and giving capacity to the African continent.
All right. Thank you so much, Honorable, for that really comprehensive reaction to that, and indeed to give us a background of how all these things get to be built, leading to where we are now. And Albert, you are in Washington, D.C. But first of all, I want to know whether there is any unique experience you get when you have heads of state from the African continent visiting that great city in the world. But two, when you look at these interactions between the countries as great as the United States of America and very small nations to the size of Mauritania or to the size of Gabon, and indeed what you've heard, for example, Ocheno here referring to that, for when Donald Trump was telling them to speak very quickly, and there's a moment where he was telling them to please mention your name and where you come from. Such interactions. What's your reaction to that sort of interaction, and do these countries stand a chance to benefit anything from such interactions in the United States?
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you, Joseph, for that submission. I would slightly take a different perspective on this. It is true that these countries are very small countries. We're talking about the USA versus these small countries. It's in this really, they're small countries. So to expect and to have this grandeur and this pomp in Washington, D.C., and be invited to this and that, and then take a whole hour or 2 hours of the time of the president of the U.S. is unrealistic. Okay. Secondly, I heard what Joseph said, and I think it's unfair to put the burden of negotiating and even getting something for African countries on the part of the U.S. The U.S. president, and I think we had these conversations during the campaign, the U.S. president, whether be it Trump or someone else, or even Barack Obama when he was president, works for the United States of America. We might like the policies, we might not like the policies, but they work for the U.S. president. I mean, for the U.S. government. They're not there to negotiate a good deal for Congo, a good deal for Rwanda, a good deal for Mauritania. They're not. They're there to see how best they can serve this place. And until our people get that, we will still be walking and talking about in these circles. It's incumbent upon African leaders to come here prepared. Like I said earlier, before your cameras rolled, elections have consequences. Donald Trump is the president of the US. We have to accept that. The rest of the world have to accept that. And you deal with the president of the US because that's who the people of the US elected. So come here, leave your egos at the door, negotiate a good deal for your people. I appreciate the history of how he came to power and whatever the notions people had for him, or even himself. But to be sure, people change, dynamics change. Yeah, maybe the first Trump administration didn't care much about Africa, but this Trump administration does, at least on the business level, which really is entirely a good thing. Okay, the aid has project has not worked. Okay, there's been so much money poured into the continent. Others, the sellout that Joseph is talking about, where African leaders have taken money, loans, and all kind of stuff, and have not really developed some of these places, at least to where they should be. So we can agree that that has not worked. So let's maybe try the trade route and see if that makes a difference for the people on the continent. But again, it will require African leaders to come to the negotiating table with a deal that is good for their people, not to expect the US to have their well-being in mind, because that is not the president, the job of the president of the US, not even for the people who are negotiating in that deal. They want the maximum deal, and for that, I applaud them. African leaders should do the same. I'll
All
stop here for
right.
now.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Albert. And Miriam, you see, a very important thing Albert talks about here, the shift from the aid to business transactions between these nations. And we are looking at African countries that for very many years have failed to develop from where they are in LDC status to say second-class nations or first world nations. And do you think in this new era, and we know that just weeks ago you said is confirmed to have been disbanded, do you see African nations now benefiting from this sort of negotiations, individual nations coming to whether the US or Russia or Europe to have these trade deals, and you see development now eventually coming out of these parts of the world in respect to the deals they will get from these beautiful countries?
Uh, I'm not yet sure whether African countries will benefit because so far we haven't seen any major trade deals being transacted in any country apart from talks and processes ongoing. So it's the verdict is still out there. We're gonna see whether there is anybody benefiting. But so far, what I can predict, depending on how African economies work, I'm sure there are some countries like Rwanda who is making a deal with exchange of prisoners and then trading minerals from Congo and all that stuff. So a few countries in the short term are going to benefit, but the bigger picture for Africa is, of course, when we are talking about the Trump era, we compare with what was there, the Biden era type of relations with Africa compared to the current. So the Biden era was focusing on African development in general, and it was contributing to whatever was on ground, and mostly was based on the AU Agenda for Africa 2063, which is like a roadmap, like planning and development structure put in place for Africa. But and then different countries, of course, depending on the resources you had, if you especially those with mineral resources, we are also making individual deals with each other. But the basic structure, the basic like which were covering like the general applying to the whole continent, where like Goa. So these were general, and every other country which would qualify, which would meet the standards, would at least benefit from that. And then individual trading quotas were exchanged for different countries. So the benefit there was there and it was predictable. But right now it's gonna be individual states and it depends on what you have and what you can trade. Of course, countries like Nigeria, maybe, and Egypt, I mean, most of North African countries which have like oil and stuff, I expected maybe to exchange a few deals here and there, like Congo, some countries like Kenya, which is already, strategizing to put their rare minerals on the market. But in the whole, so the question is, are individual countries going to benefit or certain leaders? Given the structures of development like we have in Africa, where if America is going to emphasize trade relations, transaction or not, like the previous government, which was emphasizing human rights and governance standards, call it conditions, to be met first before you enter into trade deals. We wonder how now who is going to benefit from this? Because given the corruption levels, the incompetencies within African countries and the African leaders practice, of course, there will be a trickle down. But in general, we expect like the corruption is going to rise because these transactions don't emphasize any standards at all as far as human rights and governance or corruption or any other conditions are concerned. So the benefit might be there, but will it benefit real Africans, the African citizens?
All right. Thank you, Miriam, for that. And again, speaking about these interactions, and Francis, I want to hear from you. Look, when the United States comes to countries like Uganda, or like it went for these countries now, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, we know what they have. They probably looking for manganese in Gabon, lithium, uranium, and all these minerals that are out there in those countries. And like the leaders said, much of the resources are untapped. When these African leaders go to the United States, what should they be asking for? And I've had many people criticizing the leaders for not having a plan for what they will be talking about and indeed what they should request for from the United States. What should African leaders look at when they get to such platforms, and how can they effectively achieve what they intend to get from countries like USA?
Thank you, Philip, and hello, panelists. I'll begin by saying that where chance prevails, it favors the prepared mind. Now, Miriam, Joseph, and Bakasara, they have already hinted on a series of issues. Number one, like what Bakasara said, we should acknowledge that we are small countries or we are underdogs. And therefore, don't use the mongoose approach when they are hunting a spitting cobra. They have to team up. So now, African countries, they hear or they don't, maybe if our leaders don't follow international politics, this is the time. The word MAGA, Make America Great Again, which I have seen other countries copy and paste, but was speaking it all, that this person who is coming is solely going to look at the interests of America, regardless of other countries. That was a strong message internationally to everyone. Even when you are coming to, I don't know whether you should call it negotiation or you are coming to get a brief from him, that should be at the back of your mind. And therefore, you should also prepare a good negotiating team. But then again, you are negotiating about what? Like if the interest of this man was trade, and you know that depending on other, I don't know whether even our leaders were watching when he first hosted the Ukrainian president. You just see a lot of bullying. Then don't expect you to be any different from that. But you come prepared depending on the subject matter. Like for example, you should know that he has a background of business, and therefore he will try by all means, because he campaigned telling the Americans, I will bring in more deals, I will bring back business. So he will negotiate to ensure that he pushes you to the wall and he brings business home, which I absolutely agree with him. So if for you come, you don't have any vision, you don't have any plan for your country, then you should accept to be an underdog on the table. So for me, my only problem is the unfair trade deals. that when these presidents come, do they come with a technical advice from their people back home, or they no longer even have technical experts, like for the case of Museveni, who even the technical expert, he's the one who even advises them, not them advising him. Now, if you look at, for example, he started by telling them that he has been able, that Africa is filled with anger and conflict, and he has been able to solve it. Therefore, the next aspect is business. And he gave an example of Rwanda and Congo, and they have been fighting for so many years. And then the next one, he praises them. He says he knows Africa has good land, it has minerals and oil. That was the most important thing that he wanted. Whether he's flattering Liberia that the president spoke good English and so on, he forgot that these were slaves that were dumped there by Americans. But then, therefore, their first language or official language is English. But the most important thing was minerals and oil. Of course, I appreciate the president of Gabon, Nguema, who said, we are interested in these minerals to be processed locally so that we achieve a win-win partnership. That was a good point. And I think if all African leaders were pushing towards that even if, like the gold in Uganda, even if we produce a gold ring and we are exporting that, it can make value. It can add value to Uganda than exporting it as a raw material. I think that is where we should be focusing. But when you look at the president of Senegal, is it President Faye, saying, oh, you come and build a golf course. It is only 6 hours for people to fly from USA. You see, like, it's a good thing. I mean, a golf course is a huge investment. But in terms of how much value it can add to a country, I think it is negligible. And therefore, it is important. And you see, whenever he would be discussing, you would see the head of the International Development Finance Corporation, the DF, talking about new markets and so on. And even you saw last time he was the one talking of what they have done in as far as the conflict in Congo is concerned. But at the end of the day, what they have. I'll go back. Miriam talked about Kenya. You see, we would be in a good position, for example, to negotiate, for example, as a bloc, as the East African community, maybe as ECOWAS, when we have a collective agenda. But once we come in isolated pieces, of which some of the countries don't even measure to one state of the US, then at the end of the day, the play field is not leveled. We will not achieve much, and so on. And Miriam hinted on something very important, that even when people are coming to negotiate, are they negotiating individual deals or they are negotiating for their countries? You know, like most of our African countries, they already know that even our leaders are corrupt, that even a single businessman will come with money and corrupts the real leader of the country. And then they will say, okay, provided for me you can do this, then go ahead. I think these are internal things that we have to work on. And he's looking forward to meet all African leaders. So we should be very careful. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Francis, for that. And Joseph, I don't know whether you're still with us. Look, when you listen to that, and one of the challenges of the continent that has continued to be said in these trading partnerships is the fact that countries are choosing to negotiate individually, yet their voice would have been stronger if the negotiation was, for example, at the level of the East African community or the African continent. And when you look at these very leaders, for example, the campaign of President Diomaye Faye in Senegal was majorly centered on creating an economy in Senegal that is for the people of Senegal and it is driven by those people. And we saw the campaign that was chasing out the French from Senegal and renegotiating deals with French companies. But when you see them now in the United States and negotiating the same deals, is it a better option? And it is not different from, for example, Jeno Ngema of Gabon. When he took over, he was also talking about chasing away the white man and making sure it is the Gabonese that are doing everything for themselves. Why doesn't Africa work as a team? But two, what changes when people get into leadership that they end up now preferring the individual negotiations as opposed to the entire African or regional negotiations? Yes, user.
I don't know what goes on into the heads of African leaders these days. I can also tell you that I'm lucky because I represent a political party that has got a track record of doing all of it. But quickly, I'm not even possibly sure whether that the biggest problem is individual versus doing it as a sub-regional and or continental level. But ideally, we could have both, yes. The immediate post-independence UPC government, when Milton Obote was invited to the White House by President Kennedy, they had a very decent and progressive conversation, one of which Obote told Kennedy that it was their intention to focus on education and what you, Melissa, the journalist, doesn't know, and also girl child education. And this was in 1962. And that's why in 1963, as early as that time, girl child education became at the heart of the new independent nation state. That's why the new government built girls' schools like Nabisunsa, Wanyange, Toru Girls, St. Catherine's. They expanded on the Berenyanges of this world deliberately. Meaning, our problems are both individual as local nation states, but also as a community of African peoples, meaning identity. And that's why I was very deliberate at the introduction of this conversation. Now, that did not stop there. Remember that while we're doing that as an independent nation state, building capacity for our country and building capacity for our citizens of a new emergent nation, we were very clear that the biggest enemy of the Ugandan was ignorance, poverty, and disease. And we invested on that, one, as an independent nation state, but two, we integrated that as part of East African community. And that's why by the time the East African Community was founded in 1967, really by the collapse of the East African Community within about 10 years, we had almost an integrated economy and polity. Now, side by side with that, we were also very deliberate in working as a global bodies, working with the Organization of African Unity. And Uganda was at the heart of the anti-apartheid movement. In fact, we're the official spokesperson for the liberation struggles in Southern Africa as what they call these frontline states. In fact, we're the official spokesperson of that. So therefore, you realize that the challenge here possibly is not even about the modality. The problem is the urgent need for this continent, not only to have leaders, but to have legitimate, credible leaders with mandates, but with a vision. My concern is I don't know where most of those leaders have gone to. But interestingly, you could even look at President Ramaphosa, whom I substantially respected as an activist in the 90s, himself in the 80s and early 90s, and whom I even preferred that possibly he would take over from President Mandela at the time because he was a trade unionist, he came out as radical. I'm not sure whether I see him the same way that I used to see, but I mean, he's still a colleague at a political party level, the fact that our parties are sister parties. But it's actually Ramaphosa, who was, quite nearly humiliated by Donald Trump. And this is the most powerful African nation state where they were having bilateral conversations. But number three, again, the Gambia emphasizing a specific bilateral interest should not necessarily contradict the broader, wider ECOWAS interest. So in other words, you don't go to discuss one thing, it's a series of things. But number four, which is more important, the fact that most of these West African and Sahel countries pushed away France does not necessarily mean that they cannot trade with the rest of the world. The issue was basically that the deal at the time was an impository deal in many cases, and France was basically working as the thief exploiter, so in a way, they're quite right. Where you are absolutely right, and I think one of my colleagues, I think, was it Albert or Francis raising, where I get concerned is that you realize that France wasn't the problem. The deal was terrible. And then 12 months later, you're going to, of all people, Donald Trump. Phil, you know that in the part of my other trades, I do global policy, and part of my other trade, I do global media work, and part of my other trade, I actually do write on this. Now, I think as way back as 7 years ago, I was giving a specific public advisory on the role of China in Africa. And part of my quarrel at the time was that away from Zimbabwe, I was not sure how many other African countries were seeing China as an opportunity, which opportunity could also be a threat. Guess what? Most African leaders very quickly saw China as an alternative opportunity for shortcut money. That sort of really is where we are, meaning we are almost in as bad a situation with China today as we were with the global West. And interestingly, the global West, Donald Trump is going to go. And when Trump goes, thankfully with the assistance, even if he reads third time, he won't read it. Even if he reads the third time, in the next 10 years, he won't be there. Meaning there will be another American leadership. And because of the structural and institutional systems of America, it means public opinion in America alone, and that is credit to the West, means that American government cannot massively, excessively exploit, as would be the case maybe with the Chinese or Russian government. I'm not contradicting the conversation. I'm telling you that, look, I don't know what is wrong with the African leaders where we don't strategically think and go to these people on terms. Like, as I said, when China was coming to Africa, China was extremely desperate. Donald Trump right now, as I said at the intro, is actually relatively desperate. Coming to Africa now, African leaders need to realize that, look, we are now the raw material continent of the world. We should negotiate on terms. Meaning, therefore, I don't think it should have been a visit to America. It should have been a strategic opening of a seminar conference somewhere in Gabon to say, you guys, we've got gold, we've got oil, we've got uranium. Come down here. We want a skills, a skill investment in our domestic skills, investment in our domestic resources, and a situation in which if you bring in money, you bring money, but you also bring technical skills. But if you come to invest, you're also coming to invest, to remember that you're investing on terms, and you only take a tiny little proportion of the profit. At the moment, processing this thing itself is not enough. Meaning that you can come and process here, give a few thousand jobs to average Africans, and then you suffer on the rest of the profit. Does it make any major difference? I doubt.
All right. Thank you so much, Honorable Joseph, for that thought. And Albert, again, I come back to you. And you heard Joseph here talk about, among other things, a big country on the African continent like South Africa not being respected at that level when they visited Washington, D.C. And one of the challenges that are in that lane is for Africa is the tariffs that President Trump has introduced. And we all know that all the countries of the world have what he called the baseline tariff of 10%. But specifically to some countries now in the updated list of the tariffs, you look at countries like still South Africa that is going to face a 30% tariff for goods taken to the United States. You have countries like Tunisia that are going to face 25% and a series of others. But also we have countries that have actually not featured on the new list, which actually were very high on the initial list. Countries like Lesotho had about 38% on the initial list, and now they are not on the list. What sort of diplomacy can help the African countries come to Washington, D.C. or interact with the administration in Washington to make sure they go over these kind of hurdles that are created for trade between the countries on the continent and the United States, and in any case, any other countries in the world?
Okay, so I'll answer that question, Philip, in twofold. I think there needs to be an urgency, and I think Joseph just hit on that. When everyone is running fast, Africans are still walking. With all the peace, with all the perceived peace, because most of the place is in turmoil, we need to embrace the urgency of now. These opportunities come and go. As Joseph was saying, in 5, 6 years, America will have a different president, probably different, a whole completely change of policies. So you embrace what we have here right now with President Trump. The tariffs, not so much as policy. I think I look at tariffs as opening salvos in his in his negotiations. They're not tariffs are not they don't come out of a policy that can be sustained outside the marketplace. They will have to be sustained by the market. If the market refuses the president's tariffs, he will pull back on them. And you have seen him do that with China. So,
But you see, Albert, and if you allow me just briefly before you proceed with
yeah, go
that,
ahead.
you are looking at African countries that have very little to offer for the market in the United States, and oftentimes their competitiveness is limited to the quantity, but also the price of the goods they take there. Now, if they have to compete with countries like China, countries like the UK, who also have their own tariff, but these are countries that can produce much more widely and indeed have easier access. Do they stand a chance remaining in the market, or they should pack up and come back to the continent?
Of course, they stand a chance, and I actually disagree with the premise of what you're saying. I do not believe that Africa has little to offer. As a matter of fact, Joseph put it right. Africa has the advantage right now. The things that the U.S., the rare minerals, as they've categorized them, they've lumped all them in there. They're not anywhere else. You're not competing with China for rare minerals. The U.S. is competing with China for African rare minerals. So, and now this artificial intelligence economy needs them. So we have the advantage as Africans, if I can put myself in that category. So it's not true. All they need to do is just join together, have a good technical team, come here and negotiate a good deal. You ask Commander a question on what should they negotiate for? I want to say processing is one of them. Instead of saying, hey, give us guns and then you can ask for Caterpillar tractors. You can ask for technical experts to come and then show your people to do the value addition that we've been singing about, or Uganda has been singing about for forever on value added to our agricultural products. America has that expertise here. Nobody farms better than they. Okay, looking for what to negotiate. But if you go ahead and negotiate for helicopters and more guns and more mambas and all that nonsense, it's upon you. But I do not agree that Africa is at a disadvantage here. If they were at a disadvantage, trust me, they will not be sitting in the White House with the president of the U.S. Okay, just that alone is a concession that you guys have something that I want. So it's how the African leaders and the policymakers look at that opportunity and what they do to take advantage of that opportunity. But they're not at a disadvantage, not at all.
All right. Thank you so much, Albert, for that. And look, Miriam, you see, these many African countries that we see here, and they have a lot of interest in working with the United States. But you realize, for example, when you look at the countries that were the presidents that were there, Gabon, Mauritania, when you look at Guinea-Bissau, these are countries that are listed as narcotic states by the Department of State of the United States of America. And if you get that challenge, for example, you add it to the challenge of tariffs and you add it to the challenge of the corruption you talked about in those countries. Going forward, how can these African countries, and specifically from the level of citizens, fight back to make sure they benefit from any engagements from any country, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's the European Union, or even other African countries as they move forward to seek the development that every other country is looking for?
Thank you, Philip. I want to first add on what Albert has said, that these countries really have a lot to offer, and they were picked not as a coincidence, not random picking, but it is a strategic pick. Most of these countries that were picked, like Gabon, are currently being courted by China, and we all know that U.S. biggest trade competitor in Africa is China, and that they're basically competing for same materials uh, in Africa. So it's kind of like their new scramble for African resources. And the head of state of Gabon was recently being hosted by Chinese leader, and Gabon is the leading manufacturer of manganese. Liberia has recently found minerals, a lot cautious minerals in their land, and there is also that traditional relationship with Liberia. And then there is the Mauritania, which is the like a peaceful, a kind of a peace haven in the Sahel. So there are all those. I would look at it as a stepping stone. Like, okay, we if we want to deal with Africa, where do we start from? And going back to your question, what African leaders need to do is that if US is changing its trade policy with Africa from the usual diplomatic, big brother kind of aid and diplomacy and governance, trade, and the previous government, like I said earlier, was looking at Africa as a bloc, but now if that strategy is going to change to transactional trade and business and individual countries to be uh, dealt with individually, it's time for African countries now also to go on their meeting, like go back to the drawing board and strategize on how to counter this. We all know USA is the superman economically in the world. If you want to do business, they're the first people who have the money to spend. So how do you counter their approach? How do you negotiate with them so that you benefit your country? And the African leaders need to go back on the drawing board, need to have either a rubric that would serve other countries, or would, each individual leaders need to really go back and see how do they approach this, how do they benefit as a country, especially how do they benefit their people in these transactions. We previously talked here how 36 out of 54 African countries are being targeted by USA government for tariffs, for travel bans and not tariffs, travel bans and immigration, issues banning most of their citizens to travel into USA. So if we are to be partners in business, this is the chance for African leaders to really push back on those bans, push back on that rhetoric of, Africa being a shithole. It's time to put our weight on the table and really have the confidence to negotiate as country to country, not as condescending big brother, to the smaller, bigger country. We have resources. We know we have resources and the world wants them. How do we best benefit from these natural resources that we have as Africa? We need to compare like how the Middle East is benefiting from their resources of oil and whatever and developing their countries. We need to shift from the African leader, the president's interest, that big person interest, superseding the citizens' interest. For instance, today, if you are doing any business transaction in Uganda International, you have to go to State House, sit down, and the president is the one to allocate your land. It's the one to call someone to sign for you. It's the one to stop the police from taking bribes from you. Like it's about what the president wants and will sanction that will enable you to get whatever deal you are looking for. We need to shift from that and go back to a structured system where we see institutions taking over the bargaining, taking over the procurement and strategizing for countries. and whatever business that comes to that country should be for the benefit of all the citizens, not just of the individual superman in power. And that takes us back to the drawing borders African people, takes us back to our countries and tightening the loose ends, which are corruption, poor governance, lack of accountability. How do we strengthen those loose ties so that we become competitive in international market? Yes, I think this is good in the long run. This is a shift from the usual imperial approach of conditionalities. If you don't do this, we can't trade with you. And trade was all tied up with the traditional, those traditional imperial and colonial ties of, one country being the benefactor of the other. We know the Commonwealth ties and whatever. I don't like that word, Commonwealth. So we need now to go into trade. If you are Uganda and you have oil or you want to sell, who are your salespersons and what are they putting on table? What can we build our infrastructure so that we have the bargaining power? Can we streamline and clean out the corruption so that we don't scare investors away?
But you see, Miriam, if you allow me to interrupt you a little bit there as you conclude on that point, you see, you are demanding Africans to do all that, but you realize even to solve a matter between Rwanda and the DRC, it had to take giving out a number of mineral deposits to the United States just to solve a matter between two African peoples. How can you expect them to even get to that level if they can't solve this and have to give away what belongs to them?
I'm gonna use the analogy of like a patient in emergency like emergency conditions. See, if you are at that critical level, for instance, you might need blood donation from someone instead of someone telling you that you need to feed well and do good nutrition to revive your body. There has to be a starting point. So let's first revive the situation. Let's first clean up. Maybe they needed that purge because, and let's be honest, most of these rebels get their guns and the money, the smuggling. They get them from Western trade smugglers and dubious deals. So I mean, we needed to clean up. Somehow someone has to really stop the flood, clean up the mess, and then we start from there. Let the war, let the guns first be laid down, let people first go home, they need food, they need that starting point. And after that, then we can talk about governance, because you can't talk governance when there is no even clear leadership on ground in that aspect. So I think your question was about, do we need intervention of US, for instance, instead of East African community? But we have tried everything and it has failed. So I think that intervention, if it can work, yeah, well and good. And then from there, we build up going forward.
All right. Thank you, Miriam. And last on this front, yes, you may. Thank you so much for that. And I will hear from you more as we continue the conversation. But on this conversation still, Francis, look, again, one of the interests of the United States in this meeting is one, setting up a military base in preferably Gabon. And this has been an interest desired for a very long time, according to reports around. But two, they also want to use some of these countries as dropping, I call them dropping areas for immigrants that are being arrested and captured, whichever word you want to use, from the United States, and they drop them into these countries before they get into their final destinations. And but specifically on the question of the military base, and we have many of them on the African continent. What does this mean for the future sovereignty of the African continent and peoples if we continue having military bases of foreign strong countries, China, Russia, USA, Britain, on the continent? What does it mean for our sovereignty as the people of East Africa?
No, Joseph hinted on one. He talked about the influence, the scramble for and partition of Africa, but the way how again it is manifesting itself in the modern time. He talked about China, and in a way of these, the West and the East fighting themselves or fighting their proxy wars, they look for grounds where they can go and stage their fights. And you see, like again, Africa is one of them, but in a disguise that either they are coming to provide peace to us. I don't know when we were not peaceful, and if we are not peaceful, who is the architect of the unpeacefulness in our countries? And it's not, like all these military bases that are being established in different countries are after, they are not for good intentions. They are for intentions again to keep pulling people back. Like you see for the case of Burkina Faso, when a leader comes and is also trying to work for his country, but then you would see like the things that are being thrown on him and so on. So, which means if there is any rebel group that raises against him, then immediately it will have to be supported and so on. So I think, like when I started, I said that where chance prevails, it favors the prepared mind. And Joseph also talked about a country like South Africa, that which would be our hope in Africa, that we can begin building on that and consolidate. But you see how it is being tossed up and down. I think that the military base that is going to be established there is not for good, is not in good faith. So if I were to advise the people in Gabon or wherever, I would say they should not welcome the idea. Like as I said, instead of bringing us the military base, Bakasara talked about something like infrastructure. Why can't we think of infrastructure development? If we have Ugandan can trade freely, the roads are clear and so on, such basic infrastructure and so on. A road can connect, I can drive my goods from Uganda, because the way here you can drive from the east coast to the west. Maybe it will take you 2 days. I can drive from here to Cameroon. I can drive from here to South Africa and so on. So that would be something. But because we are being isolated in small kind of cocoons without knowing what happens elsewhere, that's where our problems begin. I don't agree with that. But then you see the main target is that, okay, then we can keep getting people racism, because that is purely racism. I don't want these African.
And maybe if you allow me a little information there. For example, now in East Africa, we have something known as the North Corridor Transport System. It was proposed very many years ago and talked about in 2014, which includes a railway line, a road, pipeline, and many other infrastructure moving from the port of Mombasa through Uganda to Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, and Southern Sudan, and another one moving from Tanzania still to all the countries. But 10 years later, we've not seen this yield. Maybe it is not the planning, but the implementation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, but yes, but where does the implementation come from? Well, for example, you've seen where some of these development projects, they can't even get funding from things like World Bank. They will say, no, we don't fund that, but tell them that you want to fund other different things that necessarily are not going to develop a country. You'll see the funding would be available. I think that is where the problem is. But also, additionally, like as we have all said, what are the African leaders planning? Like, for example, instead of exchanging minerals for guns, why can't I exchange minerals for road development? Why can't I exchange minerals for another infrastructure development that I know in the long run is going to help? Maybe it will create jobs, maybe it will be technology transfer from a developed country to a less developed country and so on, and with time it will add value, and therefore if it is trade, then we have I don't know whether they call it is it a corporate advantage, that if much as maybe we can import a computer from China, but we also have the capacity, for example, to sell maybe coffee, or to sell processed bananas, or to sell whatever we can also do like that. And then that's when you find that we can talk in terms of trade. But if the things that were important that are coming from Uganda to US, for example, I'm just giving, is maybe bananas that Ugandans want to come and eat when they are in the US, and we call that, and you say there will be balance of trade, it can't be. So we have to think. Then if you look at people, like I will give an example. You see the president recently was meeting, I think, a team of people from the US, and was telling them that, oh, you see, people have built industries here. For you people from the US, you can also come and build the houses that workers can rent. Instead of saying that, look here, you guys, Bakasara and team, can you mobilize yourselves? We have gold here. Instead of pushing it out, mobilize your team as a diaspora team, those who can do the gold processing and so on, as a team of Ugandans in the diaspora, or copper and so on, or any other trade, so that there is transfer of technology back home. That's how development will come. But now, I'm sorry, Philip, but like for you, Philip, you will be the one to see the opportunity of building 2 rooms for people to rent near an industry. Not again somebody who has come here, has seen bridges being constructed, fly over, and then you also encourage them to go and begin constructing 2-bedroom houses for people to rent. And that was an advice from a head of state. And then you think that we are smart, seeing where we are heading. The issue is no. So I think these are some of the other things that we need to see and tap into what is out there. But as I said, these are chances that prevail, but they favor a prepared mind. We have to be strategic. But again, as Bakasara said, it is short-lived. Even Joseph talked about it. This is the man has come. You see how the policy. You heard of the big, beautiful bill. Oh, in a short time, something very huge. If you read it, but I don't know whether those who deal with the US, like our African countries, have got an opportunity to read it. They should take interest in some of these things. Read it and know where we are heading. So that's where I think we'll be thinking strategically, so that we're able to match.
All right, thank you so much. And you mentioned many things that are very important, and among them is Uganda's and indeed Africa's comparative advantage. Joseph here, who is back home, will tell you that, for example, the president is undertaking countrywide tours in what is called PDM tours to try and boost the production in this country, and is visiting a lot of things, including farmers, bricklayers, and so many things that are happening. And of course, there is a lot of reactions to that, and indeed what exactly he's visiting. But that and more in the next segment of the conversation, as we shift gears to focusing on specifically Uganda and the unfolding electoral process in this beautiful country. But once again, thank you so much for keeping it the Uganda Diaspora Show here on Civic Space TV. And I host a couple of distinguished citizens of the world here discussing matters of interest to Uganda, to East Africa, to Africa, and to the world. And those are none other than Joseph Ocheno, Miriam Chomgasho, Albert Bakasara, and Francis Kamanda. And colleagues, I want us to discuss this country, Uganda, and the electoral process. But briefly, I think Miriam wants to make a quick contribution here on the previous topic before we move on. Yes, Miriam.
Yeah, I wanted to say something before we move on. Sorry for disrupting. Francis mentioned something about, the diaspora's role in developing, and it reminded me of the Biden policy. Biden had put up an advisory committee to help, USA coordinate with Africans in diaspora who are living in USA on how best to develop in Africa. I think, like I said earlier, if the state can't do it, what can we do as people? I hope we as Africans, we are still able to organize and really go over, the and fill the gaps that the state is gonna leave there and continue these development projects, because I think that are the best approaches, especially for Africans' future development.
Right. Thank you for that, and very important it is. And Honorable Cheno, I want to start with you on this one. There is a lot of political activity in the country, and yes, there is a lot of political activity in the country, and when you look around from formation of political parties, because as late as yesterday we had a new political party being unveiled, and that is the Uganda Peasants Party. You have the Common Man's Party that was unveiled a day earlier. You have the People's Front for Freedom and many other political parties that are coming up as we gear towards 2026. And Honorable, I want you to give us your personal assessment of the situation in the country, and very many activities are underway, including nomination of candidates at party level from all the parties across NRM, and of course you've had the series of fights and violence at the NRM level. When you go to whether it's Sinjiro or Zimbabwe, people have died, very many of them. You have people in prisons and a lot. What is your assessment of the situation so far as the process continues to unfold? Yes.
As we're discussing the topic, and as the topic is just closing, I was thinking how much of a wasted time we had to most of our independence. I'm saying that because the things we are talking about are possible. But I'm also saying that because these things have ever happened on this continent, not only in my country, but has ever happened on this continent. I want to tell you guys once again that it is a question of leadership. Feel, for example, I'm not taking you back. In my primary school, you did not need to be an above average pupil to know that there's a road called the Trans-Africa Highway. And that happened to be apparently from Mombasa to Accra. And that there was this thing called the Great North Road, which was supposed to be from Cape to Cairo, except that Cape Town was then under occupied apartheid, South Africa. But it was a visionary dream that once South Africa was liberated, that part of a connection, those double cross, would be connected, and once linked, you'd see that our founding parents were thinking about Africa, they think about the future, they're thinking infrastructure, they're thinking education, they're thinking health, they're thinking infrastructure, they're thinking agriculture. I'm linking you to the topic we're discussing. I was just thinking, as I think Francis again was talking about MAGA, Make America Great Again. My brother Olaro Tunu, as way back as in 2009, when he was campaigning for the leadership of Uganda People's Congress, came up with this concept, Make Uganda Great Again. So those Africans, that's nearly, come to think, nearly coming to 20 years ago, 15, 16 years ago. But in this country, Phil, before you were born, in 1968, then the UPC government came up with this thing of the Common Man's Charter. Granted, it was a blueprint for a progressive move to the left. But if you hear in context, it was very much about focusing on the Ugandan person, the African people, the ordinary citizens, the Ugandan, the owners of this country. When in 1992, thereabout, I think a British Prime Minister who took over from Margaret Thatcher, John Major, came up with this thing called Citizens Charter. I remember what taunting him, but of course not directly, but telling us that, remember, these guys are just coming, but we had already set up these things. And finally, the East African community said in 1967, way back then, it is believed then EEC, the European Economic Community, at the time, which was a far struggling through, it's now part of the European Union, bought our blueprint for the East African community and feel if you continue doing your research, you'll find where a former British Prime Minister Ted Heath, I think I actually found it in one of the British libraries, actually, I think the main British library, where Ted Heath says that.
Philip, are you there?
We can't hear Philip as well, so it must be a Uganda network.
Right. I think we have lost Ocheno, internet and connectivity, but we continue the conversation. And when you look around the political space in this beautiful country, Uganda, we have a lot happening. And those of you that are not here should know that from the month of April, we've had a series of activities, voter registration, the update of the voters register. We've had political parties receiving new membership and registering new people to their parties. And now we have people getting nomination from their political parties, heading into political party primaries, and a series of other activities, including elections for special interest groups, the youth, the elderly, and the women in the villages, the parishes, and sub-counties, and all that is happening in the country. And one of the things that continue happening, even at this level, is that there is violence happening in the processes. You have people with machetes killing people who are on the opposite side. You have people fighting. You have property destroyed, houses burnt, vehicles destroyed, and many other activity that is violent in the election. And the question keeps happening. First of all, why do we continue experiencing this sort of activity in our election? Yet people should actually know that peace is the better alternative as opposed to the violence. Why does it continue happening? And how does Uganda make sure it moves away from the elections that continue to be violent every other year to elections that are actually peaceful and indeed usher in new leadership that has not come out of blood? And I'll start with you, Francis. First of all, why do you think Uganda has failed to improve on this trend, and every other year we go into more violence as we move into the next election?
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, that is has always been our concern. But if we go by a basic definition that politics is the art and science of how man organizes society, it means it is calling for service. But in Uganda is the other way around, that people are looking for political offices not to serve, but specifically as a money-making instrument and a way of dominating and subjugating others. So that's where the problem is. And therefore, we should be asking ourselves, how do we come to this? So that's where the main problem lies. That instead of politics being the art and science of how man organizes society, ours is the art and science of how one amasses wealth, subjugates others, and continues to control them. And that is what the 10-point program of the NRM, or the whatever you call it, has reduced itself to. But now in the attempt of doing that and clinging to power, they have ended up becoming an organized terrorist group that is terrorizing Ugandans. And that's why you are saying that now within even their own primaries, they still carry out those terrorist kind of tendencies. And therefore, you should feel for now the rest of the Ugandans. Number one, those who are not in power, but they want to exercise their democratic freedom that is guaranteed by the Constitution, what we are likely to face. Most especially the dissenting voices. Of course, this one we have always talked about it over and over and over again. Now, to me, being a person on the other side of the political views in Uganda, for us, we have never stopped. That's why you see we keep mobilizing, we keep educating the masses. And Joseph said that some of the things that were talked about much earlier, then we see them happening. Like, I don't know, for the time I have been with Joseph Bakasar and so on this panel, we have been talking about this and saying, look here, this violence, it will even come to haunt you. But to me, I see the violence within the NRM is a rehearsal for 2026. If you see a machine grinding stones, you can't bet that it cannot grind millet. It will automatically crush it. But then what do we need to do as a people? We have tried to educate our people. Like, we have tried to do all it takes. But then the Museveni and his people have known that the more people are enlightened, the more his regime will be no more. That's why you see he suffocated the civic space. That for him, he can move all over the country talking to people, but any other person should not. Even when he's wasting billions of money to go and look at two goats. You saw how he was looking at two goats, mesmerized about two local goats, and I think one pig. And I was like, this president looks at a goat. It was black and white, and then one pig, and was mesmerized and saying, wow, we have made it. So I think if the civic space was open, and that's why you see, you must have observed that we are like ANT, we had a signed collaboration between us and the FFP party, so that we begin seeing how do we team up as political parties, because that's what Ugandans have been asking for. But then the role of Ugandans is also to resist what they are being used for, like what Sechikubo did, or what happened in Rwemiyaga, what happened in Kasambia with Kabanda and the team. They are using our real local people because of suffocating the civic space. Like, people don't know what is their rights, what is their role. I have seen in constituencies, a person who was going to campaign gave out cassava. I think brought sacks of cassava, and each one was having one tuber like this of cassava. And they're saying, oh, our man. Another one bought warrage, Uganda warrage, in small sacks and gave so many people, and men were chanting. And I'm like, is your family going also to drink this warrage? And then, so I think we need to do much. And I feel for the next president of Uganda who shall come up and cleaning all this mess, it shall take time. But we can't stop. We'll keep talking. We'll keep reaching out to people in our own way, even when space is not there, is suffocated, to ensure that people know their rights, and most important, to keep telling them that there is an alternative way of how we can do things.
Thank you, Francis, for that detailed submission. And Miriam, I want to come to you. Candidate Yoweri Kaguta Museveni Tibuhaburwa, and of course there is talk of a fifth name being added to that list, is on the ballot even in this election, and he's talking of this time fighting and finishing off corruption. He's talking of propelling Uganda's economy from 50 billion US dollars to 500 billion US dollars in the next 10 years, which would actually mean he perhaps wants to be around even in the next 10 or so years. What does this mean for Uganda? And indeed, when you look at one man, if he goes ahead to win the election, making it 45 years in power, where does this take Uganda in terms of leadership, in terms of service delivery, and did you see any change in the new term as opposed to what has been happening in the previous terms of Gen 7?
I want, when I saw Seven really vying for another seventh time, I was like, okay, some people really don't have no sense of shame. At what point does a person realize that they have failed at the project? Because fighting for corruption was one of the 10-point programs that we had 45 years ago or 40 years ago in 1986. And Museveni has been in charge of every state power instrument. If at all he couldn't fight corruption since then, what magic wand does he think he has to do it now in 2025? You know, when I saw General Moses Ali vying for power and the guy can't even speak, can't even stand, I had this illusion of seeing, I had a nightmare, like I thought I was seeing Museveni in 2036 vying for power. He's going to he's going to be there even then, you know, like we don't want to stop him, and it's upon us to change this. It's not upon him. By this time we are very much assured that Museveni doesn't want to retire peacefully or on his own personal code. At least we all know that, and he can't pretend about it. And we are all aware that there is nothing much he can do. That one is sorted, and we knew that maybe like 20 years ago. We know that there is nothing much he can do. If I can quote Vestige, what does he want to do now that he couldn't do 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when he had power, when he had energy as a human being, when he was young and he had a vibrant mind, when he had physical energy and he had the support of all Ugandans. And we are all also aware that right now there is very a reduced number of Ugandans who really support him without coercion, without being bought, without being rigged. And that number keeps going down. That's not also, I mean, nobody can pretend about it. Even if you ask him, 7 knows. And that's why he has to keep leaders in prison, opposition leaders in prison, like Vestige, for no charges so far. I mean, charges are there, but I mean, no verdict so far. And we all know that they could be trumped charges. Kizza Besigye is one of the most arrested people in the world, and he has never been convicted of anything as far as these political accusations are concerned. So, I mean, we are there, we are stuck, but I don't want to talk about Museveni anymore. I don't want to blame him or whatever. Okay, he knows what he wants and he knows how to go out and get it, and we have allowed it. It's a bonus. Why do we allow that degeneration? Why have we allowed that political decadence to go on and on without being abated, without putting up measures to stop it? I was listening to Kizza Besigye was addressing his new party PFF even while in prison. I think that was like an audio recording or something like that. And he was saying, I mean, the recent excuse that the NUP and the Francis Kamhanda's ANP party and the UPC of Joseph Okieno are talking about people who are present here. I mean, the excuse of opposition leaders right now, the reason they tell you they don't want to push back on the government excesses, they said they don't want people to be hurt. And I had the city, for instance, was giving an example saying that there are so many ways you can resist. There are so many ways you can challenge the government without even putting your physical bodies out there. So many ways. And given with the internet, the IT revolution we just have all the opportunities. We have avenues. We have institutions. Look at how people in Sudan challenged Bashir. Look at how people are challenging Ruto in Kenya. You know, there are so many other ways. We have scholars. We have people who could protest. People say in power, in powerful position, the legislature, the judiciary, who could put up a stand and say, no, this enough is enough, and you protest. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says, because the Constitution has been I mean, the constitution allows Museveni to go on perpetually, I mean, forever as if he wishes, and he knows how to manipulate the electoral commission. So what I'm saying is not that you break the law as far as that is concerned, but I'm saying you can protest and say, we have to put an end to these excesses. We have to really reclaim our country as Ugandans. And if we really want to develop, we need to do something about it.
All right. All right. Thank you, Miriam, for that contribution. And Albert, I want to hear from you before I come back to Ocheno here. Look, we have a series of new political forces and political actors, and when you look around the African continent, in nations where the leaders have been there for quite some time, you see a bit of unrest. And when you go, for example, when you use the example of Togo, President Faure Gnassingbé is facing a lot of opposition. There is a protest, I think, for 2 months now in a row, and people on the streets demanding him to leave. And this has happened in many other countries. But of course, we know there are also many other countries where leaders have been there for some time, and things seem not to be shaken in any way. And a good example can be Cameroon, where we have a fairly old gentleman there. What do you see happening in this new election and new term that is coming in? And of course, I've had many people say that if Museveni is on the ballot, then he has already won the election. How do you see things unfolding in the new term? And indeed, do you anticipate anything new happening in this election, including seeing much more activity like we see in Kenya from the youth demanding for the resignation of their president, and indeed a couple of other things in that country?
I don't see, and thank you for the question. I don't see anything new happening in this campaign in Uganda. And actually, my submission on this subject would be very, very short because I have reserved my energy waiting for elders like Joseph and the others, veterans, to reach where my conclusion so we can have a real conversation. Because I do not believe that elections in Uganda will work to change the government. I believe, I think Kamhanda is the one who said that politics is how society is organized. But I believe that was the Greek philosophers talking about the Roman Empire. When we're talking about modern politics, especially those in Uganda, you're really talking about power, accumulation of power, influence, and wealth. Okay, so that's a completely different dynamic than what the Roman emperors were dealing with when they were dealing with the Senate and the other governing organs of the empire. So, having said that, we will go back to Uganda, and I think it will have to be a conversation about power redistribution, wealth redistribution. In my humble opinion, I think in a very short time, there's a group of people, and mostly come from one area, that have accumulated a lot of power and a lot of wealth. That imbalance is at the root of Uganda's political instability. The violence you're talking about is just a symptom. And until there is a sincere conversation about that, everything else is noise, whether somebody's beginning a new party and the symbol is a tree or a yam or whatever. It's just a waste of time. Like I said in the beginning, we seem not to have or to embrace the urgency of now. It's like as if we have all the time in the world and the rest of the world is leaving us behind as Africans. Okay, so this is one of those times where a whole 2 decades have been wasted in that conversation. I think, like I said, I will wait until the conversation reaches there when people are talking about, and this can take so many shapes. And we have examples, by the way. South Africa did it at some point. The white apartheid government realized that this was unsustainable, and they had to choose, they actually chose between power and wealth. They chose power and relinquished wealth. They chose wealth and relinquished power. The monarch in the UK did a half and half. They said they had to relinquish it because it becomes unsustainable. When you look at you on College streets and you look at tomorrow, I don't know what, when they look at these people, whether it's the security organs or leaders or when you walk in Kibuye, Kabalagala, especially at 9 o'clock at night, when you see those people, especially the young people, I don't know. You'll have to find a solution for them because if something was to happen, you do not have enough bullets to stop. It will be a bloodbath. So until we reach a point when we can have a conversation about power and wealth redistribution, where you say, you know what, there's so much power concentrated in very few hands in Uganda now that has also been the wealth, that it's unsustainable. Somebody has the power to jail you in their basement. That's a lot of power. Some of it has to go back to where it belongs. It has to be redistributed. Somebody has
Wow.
wealth to do obscene things. It has to be redistributed. Or else people are not going to sleep and hungry and watching you and your cows grazing by. They're not. They're going to chop them and eat them. It's the law of nature. No one is going to go hungry with your cows grazing in front of their house. Okay. So until we reach that conversation, me, I'll suspend and reserve my energy until the conversation comes out the real solutions
All
of what
right.
to do about Uganda.
Yes, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Albert, for that. And for you, the image is quite dull and dark, and hopefully it can be changed for the better. But as we near the close of the conversation, Honorable Cheno, I want to hear from you. First of all, we have new political formations, and there is talk of unity at the level of the opposition. There is already steps between the PFF and the Alliance for National Transformation, and they are saying there are initiatives to make sure the wider opposition is together in this particular election. But two, there is talk of dialogue in the country, and three, there are people who talk about civil disobedience as the only thing that can save this country of the mess that is around in this country in terms of changing leadership and making sure things are done the right way. Which one could work? And if you are advising Ugandans, why would you tell them to go and indeed make sure they achieve the desired goal at the end of the day? Yes.
All of them can work. And I say all with emphasis. That therefore includes civil disobedience. And I'm saying so because you realize that I had a technological interruptions earlier. And some of the interruptions are extremely irritating because it's infrastructure. I stopped over in the middle, reasonable affluent part of Kampala on my way home to make sure that I was able to be in time for this program. And it's either electricity or some jug going out there that you bang, bang, and bang. Somehow I've managed to see, if you see my camera, I've had to now reconnect to another gadget in order to continue this conversation. This is 2025. It cannot continue like this. I was giving you a boring intro to this subject, partly because I say it's governance and yet we talk about elections. What the Imperial West did immediately after our independence, and including Albert, particularly like the way you suggest some of your nuances. I think some on the orders on this part. I think you guys need to be angry. Young Philip, you need to wake up, and you need to wake up your brethren and sisters, and take us back to the time around independence or pre-independence, where our leaders and our citizens, some of them who could barely read and write, came together, resolved, identified the common enemy, and pushed. Came together, resolved, and identified the common enemy, and in diversity, as a community of nations in the Republic of Uganda and across the continent, did it. And I was saying that immediately after independence, these guys came together in diversity. and delivered an independent nation state, as I said, that the Europeans were 10 years into our independence, scheming how to check us economically, seeking how to check us politically when it comes to problems and the uptide movement and others. I am saying quickly, fast forward when these guys were interrupted. Of course, the earliest was the killing of Patrice Lumumba. I'm saying this very deliberately. Then, of course, the overthrow of Nkrumah, and then of the overthrow of Milton, but all of them by imperialist ages. And why? To check these programs. And I'm saying that lest all of you guys forget the context, but I think we're all on the same page. Fast forward, we are down truth on with Idi Amin. In Uganda's case, Obote 2 comes, Obote refused to get bribes from Tiny Rollins. I'm saying it for this program. I think in another program I've said this before. Tiny Rollins of Londro, the ugly face of capitalism, decides to work with the others to overthrow Milton Obote, but to support Yoweri Museveni. What am I saying? While the progressive independent African leaders were checked, so was our attempt to build new nations with democratic institutions, however weak they were. When the Musevenis came together with Kagame and Meles and Zenawi, they were called the new breed of African leaders. But there's a bunch of dictators in the countries. Granted, Kagame seems to have an idea what to do with his Rwanda in his version. Museveni doesn't. Museveni knows what to do with his family and those who say yes to him. Granted, I think in Ethiopia, Meles roughly pushed a particular agenda regardless of where Ethiopia is. Now, if you see that and you bring us exactly to where we are today in Uganda and the elections, no, what is taking place between now and January, February next year is a charade. It's just another trip down the sea. Yes, granted, you feel I could see you smiling while you're emphasizing PDM journalism. No, Mr. Museveni is not only campaigning, but Mr. Museveni is campaigning in your face using public resources, basically to entrench a dictatorship. I was telling another program earlier that I'm actually surprised that political leaders of various political parties like myself, to the disappointment of Albert, some of my colleagues don't see that, but if we see it, I don't think we amplify these things wide enough. What is it? The playing field is completely not level. A son of a dictator is able to go and boast over how he breaks people's necks, and is able to go and boast over how he will do certain things to women, and to go ahead and boast of how he's able to expel diplomats from some of the most powerful nations of the world, and how to go ahead and boast of how he's going to dump people in the garages. What is it called in the is it garage? What is it? Yeah. What do they call it?
The basement.
In the basement. And this business as usual. That is not since Idi Amin in this country. What are Ugandans doing and what are Africans doing? So my point is this. I think these are wake-up call opportunities. I hope, my opinion, that we do not need more political parties, but we need more leaders. And so that regardless of the formations and regardless of the realignments that I think quite rightly my colleagues in ANT and the PFF come to realize that they are regrouping and that there's an element of common enemy somewhere, whatever the detail. That is a sensible move. And that whatever happens, of course, unfortunately, that from KY to DP to then NUP, which originally was People Power Movement that embraced everybody else, but somehow ended up NUP, and now with the DF. That is a contradiction within the century. But whatever the case, leaders who emerge out of that, I hope they're able to work together with all of us as political party leaders, but with civil society organizations like and media like yourself and me. That there is a leadership that emerges, that the Ugandan problem is one that requires everybody from civil society to religious institutions to communities to cultural institutions that will recognize that we've had 40 years of a roadie, but 40 years of an imperative in which Mr. Museveni has got to go. And so, like Albert was suggesting, how do you begin to have this conversation in national debate around a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but with a conversation which is really about a transition, and a transition which is not about pointing fingers, but a transition in which we're able to save our nation state. But unfortunately, you cannot do peace.
Yes, as you conclude with that, sir.
Yes, you have partners. My worry is at the moment we don't have partners in NRA led by Mr. Museveni, but I know they are partners within NRA and that gives me hope.
All right. Thank you so much, Honorable Joe. And Francis, you see, all these challenges exist and continue to exist in this country, Uganda, and of course in many other African countries. But how do we move forward? Because the country has to move, services have to be delivered, the election has to happen. How do we move forward and make sure the country continues to develop and people not only survive but thrive in their own country? Yes, in a minute or two.
Thank you, moderator, fellow panelists. We have always said this. Mr. Bakasar is routing for a negotiation and maybe a dialogue. I do say that yes, but you bring a dialogue or a negotiation where the other party has agreed and has known that yes, what we are doing is not right. You see the fantasy of the public apology that the Museveni did, but could not even mention a single thing of I apologize because of this. But it was just something generic, something cosmetic. I thought he was going into the right trajectory. And I think it's not until somebody is pushed and then they realize, okay, we have infringed, we have trampled on people's rights for long. Now there is an outburst that a person will even think that now we can sit and negotiate. The example of South Africa, yes, there was an outburst. It was not that because people just sat. No, that's why I was saying that if the civic space is not neutralized as the case is in Uganda, then it's when people would come and realize. I do agree with Bakasara that where Museveni is and his team, they can kill everybody because they think they have the power within themselves. But I do still think that as a people, we should take the route of civil disobedience as much as we can, up to when the perpetrator will realize that it's time either to give in and negotiate or it's time to relinquish power. But apart from that, nothing is going to happen because all the infrastructure and state institutions are captured, including even what we would say the police or the army that would be for everyone. So the police will not cover you when you say, okay, I have a peaceful demonstration, for example, or I have a meeting, I'm going to meet people. So you find, and not until, and that we have a challenge. That's why we are doing it in our own way, like reaching out to people in different ways. Yes, Miriam was talking about we can use social media and so on. But remember, some of the rural communities, they don't have such a kind of services. Even if they had them, already Joseph is telling you, he's in the city center, but his network has been on and off. All those infrastructure problems, all these would be tools that will be used for mobilization. But I also still insist that part of the approach is civil disobedience. Yeah. And the way how we can build it is through a civic space that is open, and the coalitions and collaborations that we are to pick from other like-minded people how they are doing it. And once we come up as a massive kind of team, there will be a momentum to push the dictatorship that has occupied Uganda for decades. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Francis. Miriam, moving forward as a country and the election is here, it can't be cancelled. How are people going to move into a process peacefully and indeed get the desired goals?
Like that, my fellow panelists have said, really, we don't see much change coming out of this election system. And like Joseph said, it's just another charade that we've held on forever. And most of the people are pessimistic. I mean, at the ground level, the primaries, I mean the constituencies, the local leadership sometimes change, but there is a lot of violence which also causes destruction and loss of lives, and sometimes like we see in Zimbabwe. So I call upon players really to minimize that and try to stay safe if you can. But there is a lot we can do. And I want to echo what Bakasara said. It's the ruling class. It's upon the ruling class. It's upon these people who are really exploiting other Ugandans, the ones with power, excessive power. They're the ones to commit what they call a class suicide. They are the ones to reach back to the other people, the ordinary Ugandans, and tell them, and try to redistribute this power, the political power, the resources, and we need to talk transition yesterday. This is not sustainable. Like Francis said, at one point, I don't know whether it's Francis or but I'm sorry. He said at one point the people will start chasing these people who have stolen from the government. Hungry people will start chasing you from the streets because people can't just look on and die when you are busy grabbing everything that should be feeding the rest of the population. So it's upon us, it's upon the elites, it's upon the ruling class, those in power, the military, the politicians, the president, the beneficiaries of the president, including his family members, friends, and relatives. They know themselves that those who are eating from the establishment. They are the ones to say enough is enough. They are the ones to know that whatever they are doing is not sustainable and the way forward is more destructive to them, especially because they are going to lose everything and cause mayhem to the country and destroy the few things that are there. So it's upon them to go back, to reach back and redistribute this power, have a political transition, put up a team, find a way to reconstruct our political institutions, our civic society, our education, our infrastructure, all the areas and everything the way it is. We need that transition. And if we can borrow leave, I don't like using Western countries when I'm talking to Africa, but let's borrow leave from Kenya. The way they transited from Moi dictatorship to the transitional government of Kibaki and the rest, the way they negotiate, they bargained that corner. I think we can boldly from that readjust our constitution, get back to the center and find a way to move forward, which is more peaceful but more inclusive and accommodating of all Ugandans.
All right. Thank you, Miriam, for that. And Albert, I don't know whether you're going to advise everyone to sit back and wait for the right time when the right people have come. But any final words for the people in Uganda and indeed the diaspora as far as the contribution in the electoral process is concerned?
Thank you, Philip. More to correct you, I don't think my vision is that dull and gloom. I think that's a mischaracterization. It's the reality. And now you hear even Joseph and Miriam and Commander echo the same one. Everyone knows what is going to happen. We're not kids here. Everyone knows, even the people. I hear people saying, okay, the country is in captivity. But even the captors themselves know this, that at some point, the status quo will not be able to hold any longer. And it will fold. And when it folds, things will happen. They usually do. Museveni, of all people, is a very good student of history. Very good student. You cannot control it. So what I'm suggesting is the reality. And I disagree with Mr. Kamuhanda in saying that they have to give us this or they have to open the space. No one gave the black South Africans a peace. The whites didn't come to the table because they wanted to or when they were ready to. They were forced to the table. And I don't mean force. When I say force, I don't mean violence. I mean to have a real conversation. There are people, intellectuals, and also some who claim that they're intellectuals, the Mpugas, for example. Instead of starting a new party, you could be having this conversation. Okay, because starting a new party and having another member of parliament, or maybe you win a seat or two, is a waste of time when you actually know where the real cause of the problem is and what needs to be done. So wasting that time, that's why I said that I don't really engage in this conversation, because I know nothing will change. And I know exactly whether we do this after a civil war or after a bloodbath, we're going to get there. We're going to have this conversation. There is no way. There's no way that this will be sustained for 10, 20, 30 years from now. There's no way. Okay? No one will sit hungry and watch you and your children enjoy this opulence. It will not happen. No one is going to sit by and watch, go hungry, their families is struggling, and you are living in it. It won't happen. And I do not know why a good strategist and a good tactician like the president of Uganda has allowed institutions to die, because actually the institutions that have died in Uganda would have been the very institutions that would have propelled his son to have a smooth transition. Take an example here in the US where institutions work. I would not be surprised if in 2028 Donald Trump's son becomes president, because all it requires is have a good bullet pulpit, have money, become the nominee of the Republican Party, and at that time it's 50-50. He's in power because the institutions work. But in Uganda, the current administration has decided that the institutions don't work for that project, and they've killed them. And in so doing, they've also endangered that project, because there's nothing that now, if that young, well, he's not young anymore, but although he behaves so, but if he gets power tomorrow, there are no institutions to protect him, because his father killed them. There are no institutions to protect him. He will be ruling with his head and eyes in the back, suspicious of everybody, probably jailing everybody, the same thing. But that is not where we should be aiming to be as Ugandans or Africans. I'll stop there, Phil. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Albert. And I know, Honorable Cheno, a quick one in about a minute. How moving forward? What should we do? What should be done in about a minute as we get out of here, sir?
I think we need to continue talking, and I think your programs need to continue working. But much more younger people need to get more interested in this debate, and more younger people need to come forward, because critically it's really about the future, to engage with ourselves and to listen to some of what we're telling them, and to stop doing more TikTok, but to do more Uganda and more of their own future. More young Ugandans want to be able to do what I did yesterday at a telecommunications company's office, to turn to their manager to ask them to speed up the process of what they needed to do to me, for me to reach one member of staff. I said 4 days, and the manager said 24 hours, and I said there's no reason why it doesn't happen, and it happened in 2 hours. As it happens, the telecommunication company is a company, an exploitative company from abroad, and nobody had ever challenged them with whatever needed to be done. And of course, I got the service in 2 hours, although my family and some of the people who were waiting for me elsewhere were a little bit irritated because I took rather too long in that place. I told them that, no, I'm doing a service, I'm doing better than what an MP should be able to do in 5 years. That's what we need to do. But whatever happens, we need to talk, we need to mobilize, we need to have like-minded men and women of Uganda coming together and strategically taking into what Albert and everyone else is saying to make sure that, no, we put these guys to task. It is actually possible to challenge these guys. It's possible to make it inconvenient for them. It's actually possible to make Mr. Museveni change his position and change direction. I totally agree, yes. South Africa, it was a push from all the rest of the world to make it impossible for the Boers to continue with the status quo. There's no reason why it doesn't happen here in Uganda.
All right, Honorable Joseph Ocheno, thank you so much for your thoughts and for the time you've made for the conversation today, and certainly the many recommendations you give. Hopefully they can be picked up and continue to effect and cause change in this country. Miriam Chomgasho, thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts, and indeed, hopefully some of the views you share I picked up and be able to contribute to the change desired in Uganda and all the countries around. Albert Bakasara, thank you so much for your time and for making time to the conversation, and indeed for your recommendations and views on how things can change. And Francis Tamhandas, also thank you so much for your time and for making time for the conversation today, and for the views and the recommendations you share that can contribute to changing how things are done in Uganda, but also on the continent, to ensure we get the progressive development we seek as the peoples of this continent. Special thanks to you, our viewers. Thank you for keeping it to the Ugandans in Diaspora Show and the wider Civic Space TV. Special thanks to the technical team and indeed to the Center for Constitutional Governance and all other partners who make a contribution to make sure this is in place, and we continue to add a word, a break, and indeed in building the beautiful country Uganda. I thank you so much for being with us, and I say thank you for today and see you next time as we continue to have these conversations. Good evening and see you next time.